Good, good morning. I guess the first thing to ask is, can everybody hear me okay? That music seems to have disappeared. Thank you for whoever organised that. My name's Helen Hancock. I'm Director of Research Design Service and absolutely delighted to be hosting this event today. Thanks so much to our Programme Grants colleagues for joining us and to you for coming. We hope it's a really valuable session. I have no reason to doubt that it won't be. We hope it's a two-way conversation. So we've got obviously some presentations through the morning, but there will be lots of opportunity for conversation and questions as we go through. Perhaps we will allow our speakers to speak, and then we can raise questions further towards the end if that's okay. A slight change to our agenda. Unfortunately, Kelly Lysett hasn't been able to join us today, but I'm reassured by Programme Grants colleagues that they will be able to fill that time and actually can talk to that subject as well, which is brilliant. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. There is, I understand, no plan for any fire drill today. So if we hear a fire alarm, we will need to evacuate. And bear in mind, as they would say on the airlines, your nearest exit may be behind you. So if you have a look, there are clear signposts, and apparently our point of meeting is at the front of the hotel, and then we'll be escorted from there. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Just, you've probably noticed there's a camera. We're streaming today, we're videoing. There are some people, I understand, who have requested not to be included in photographs. So if you are going to tweet, please bear in mind that other people might not want their photos shared, but we would encourage sharing of information throughout the morning. So as I said, I'm Director of the Research Design Service, and I'm going to take a little bit of your time to talk about what it is that we do and how we can support applications to programme grants and to other NIHR funders. Obviously, we're here to talk about programme grants today. And what I would say is think about, in terms of what I share with you, how that might help you in the development of your proposal and any application that you make. So our remit is to increase the quality, essentially, of applications to NIHR for funding for research. We are one of 10 RDS regions, and we work nationally. So if you want to come and see somebody up in the northeast North Cumbria, that's great. But if you don't live in this part of the country and you want to see somebody elsewhere, other RDSs are available, as they would say. We provide advice on all aspects of design and conduct. So we'll talk to you about research design, obviously, but we've got expertise right across the board, so that we can help you with all of the things that you need to try to be successful in those applications. We've got expertise, and I think this is something that's changed quite recently as part of a new contract that we're now in. We've got expertise right across the region. So we work with a number of organisations that you'll see there so that we can draw on the best expertise from right across the region. And where that expertise isn't within our region, though we think most of it is, we also work with other RDSs. So if you want to do a particular piece of work, a particular design, whether it be an adaptive trial design or a particular qualitative methodology, we can help. We can put you in touch with people who can provide that expertise. We work not just in programme grants, but right across the spectrum of NIHR funders. So if you go away today thinking not quite ready for programme grant, need to start elsewhere, we can help with those things. We help you to turn a research question into a proposal. And as I'm sure most of you will know, that doesn't come easily, and there are a number of steps and a number of aspects to doing that, and to doing that successfully. And impact is absolutely key. particularly it is the topic of conversation across NIHR now. It's the so what question. What difference is this going to make to patients and the public? As I said, we do more than the design. We will put teams to help you to put teams together. We have our own consumer panel, comprised of a diverse group of patients and the public, who will review proposals, review those lay summaries, ask well, what does that mean for me? Is that important? And when you submit an application to a program grant, there will be lay representatives on those panels. So you need to be able to communicate what you do. Those are important parts of any application. We've got really close links and relationships with all of the funders, so we know what they want. We know what their expectations are. What are the pointers for success? What are the do's and don'ts, if it's ever as hard and fast as that? But we know more than is on the websites, because we've done it before, we've seen it before. We sit on the panels, so we've got those insights. We have supported successful program grants. Come and talk to us about the expertise that we have in doing that, and we can guide you through, as I say, that process of developing an application. The support that we offer is tailored to what you need. So we can come and meet you where you want us to be. We're the service. And whether that's face-to-face or telephone or however those meetings suit you, that's what we would offer. We're free. We've recently begun work with colleagues over in Cumbria as part of this new contract, and some of the surprise there was around, gosh, it doesn't cost anything. We're free. We can provide support, NIHR funded support, which is great. And one key message I would underline is contact us as early as possible. When you've got that initial idea, come and have that conversation. We can help you to develop all the things that you need to put those proposals together. You can contact us. We've got a website that's, I would say, pretty easy to navigate through. As I said, other RDSs are available, so I've included on there the link to the national RDS website, and then from there links to other regions. So that's all from me, and I'll hand you over.
Hi, while they're loading up the presentation, I'm Raj. I've been working on the scheme, the program grant scheme, since 2007, so I've seen the good and the bad. I've seen everything. So between myself and Elaine, we'll talk you through what the scheme tries to achieve and what makes a good program. Just waiting for the slides to come up. Apologies if I look a bit grumpy. I feel grumpy because I get the flu. I'm getting the flu's coming. Great, thanks. So, just my presentation will deal with mainly the procedural aspects of the scheme, and then will pick up on the strategy and where we're hoping to take the scheme. So we'll start with some facts and figures, overview, what we're trying to achieve. But this scheme was originally set up to not only provide sort of large amounts of funding to actually make a difference to some of the research problems that we're facing, but also to provide some long-term support for leading teams. I mean, we want to get some good people working together for a decent period of time, and that's not always possible through project grants, as you know. So that's one of the key aspects of program grants. So, as already has been alluded to, you've got the adoption, sort of the bench to bedside pathway. We are really in the evaluation, predominantly in the evaluation part, but I'm keen to see us move more into the adoption space. That's a dirty word with the Department of Health, I have to say, because funders shouldn't be doing implementation. So there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be looking at issues of implementation, and Elaine can touch upon that later. But I actually want to go a step further. If we've spent £3 million developing something and it's shown to work, why shouldn't we then actually make an effort to make sure it's adopted? How that happens and how we can make that happen is probably something we need to think about, and all of your input and support would be welcome in that discussion, because we will be having that conversation not only with our panels but with the wider community. So there's two funding schemes. There's program grants, obviously, the major part, but there's development grants, which has been running since 2008. So a typical grant is 5 to 6 years. We have over 100 programs to monitor, so that's quite a busy workload for the team and I. The biggest grant we've got is 3.2 million. And that's a 10-year program because there's enormous follow-up, and it's needed because it's some of the outcomes, you just can't get them unless you spend time following up. But that's an interesting point in itself, because we're obviously, it's about patient benefit. So it's great that we got one and we can follow up for a long time, but we really want to see some sort of outcomes within a reasonable time frame once the research is completed. And we've committed nearly £500 million. If you actually look at what's come through the system, I think Sean can correct me on this, it's like it's probably more than £1 billion, is it? What 1.3 billion? So what's 0.7 billion not funded? So some stats here. So we've obviously processed a lot of applications. I think the key thing is to remember that, so from stage 1 to stage 2, you've got about a 40% chance of getting through, which is not bad. And then once a stage 2 application is considered by the panel, you've got a 38% chance of getting a recommendation for funding. These are the historical figures. Of late, I'll show you a graph. It's actually more promising. I mean, if you can present a decent proposal to the panels, you've got a good chance of getting funded, because right now the money is still available, so it's not a competition. So if you meet the quality bar, you will get funded. So these are the sort of areas we funded. And apologies, this is not a very good graphic, but mental health is a big area for us. We've commissioned a lot in that space, but that's largely driven by the very first call, which was in the then topic-specific networks, so mental health, diabetes, medicine for children with stroke, and neurology. But proportionally, if you look at the number of applications we get in against each of those topic areas versus what's recommended for funding, it's the same. So there's no preference, even though the figure, the graphic suggests that we favour mental health or infection. It's really all relative. So I was just alluding to the success rate. So as the process has evolved, and it has evolved to try and help everybody applying, the quality of applications is in. So it's good to see that as our process has changed, the quality of applications has improved, and you can see now that really, if this thing, is there a laser? I can't even see it. Right at the end, you can see you've almost got a 50 to 60% chance of getting a grant if it meets the quality bar. It was a lot lower 3 or 4 years ago. And this is just a broad overview of where NIHR as a whole is putting its money. So there's a huge amount in infrastructure. Obviously, the programs cover a good proportion, and that pie chart is quite busy. And I think these slides are available, so you can sort of look at them at your leisure, but it just gives you a breakdown overall of where NIHR's money is going in the topic area. So I'm just going to focus now, obviously, on program grants. So, as I mentioned, we're looking to support leading research teams. We want them to make a difference. That's the key thing. Get a really outstanding team together to make a profound difference to healthcare in that topic you're interested in. So a typical program will be 5 to 6 years and 2.5 million, but there's no cap on the funding or the duration. So if you want to really push the boundaries, just make the case. I mean, really, really present your argument, and the panels clearly have a look and make a decision. This is money for the NHS and England, so we only contract with NHS organisations. But we do expect there to be academic input, because that's obviously where the methodological expertise is coming from. So it's a partnership, and we're looking for that. We operate a two-stage process like most funding schemes. For me, that makes sense, because it may feel a bit longer to people applying, but we don't want to waste people's time. So it's an enormous effort to put a program grant application together. I mean, you're probably looking at 2 years from start to finish. If you really, from evidence to the application. So we don't want to waste your time, and the panels and the reviewers don't want to waste their time, so they want to see quality. We run 3 calls a year now. Typically, they launch in February, June, and October. We may look to review that, because most of our timetable seems to fall in half term and Christmas holidays, and probably the worst time for the applicants. So we're having a look at that. And then our final reports are published in the Journals Library. Again, we're looking at that because we recognise that's an interesting process that could do with some review as well. So what do we want to do? I mean, it's clearly applied health research. We're looking to make a difference. So this is more than just... So I always class program grants as HTA on steroids. That's how I've pitched it. So we're looking to do much more than HTA. So we're looking to make a massive difference. And I think, and Elaine will touch upon this, we've just got into a bit of a rut. It's clearly going to be our bread and butter. We got into a bit of a rut about complex interventions and their evaluation and the development. But I think we should be doing more than that. And if you look at the early programs, they were doing more than that. I mean, they were running parallel work packages, but they were working synergistically. And they were very ambitious and very complex. And now we seem to be funding very linear programs, equally they're quite complex, but I think we should be doing more. And so the sort of disciplines that are listed there in terms of health psychology, health economics, that's fine, but it shouldn't always be about health psychology and statistics is key, but I think observational research is key, and that's disappeared from our program. We used to fund a lot of epidemiology. We don't seem to do that anymore, and that's what we're trying to change. But the key thing is the work packages that make up your program need to work together. There needs to be an interrelationship between them. They need to be synergistic, coherent, whatever word you want to use. There needs to be a reason why you're putting all this work together as a program rather than going for 5 RFPBs and then a bit of HTA and then a bit of HS&DR. You can do all of it in a program, but there has to be a reason why you're doing that, and the reason is the coherence. So these are the sort of things the panels will have in their mind when they're looking at your application. Is it an important question? It's the so what question that we've already alluded to. Why is this needed? Is it going to make a difference relatively quickly afterwards? We used to have 3 to 5 years, but that almost is meaningless. I mean, I think it's impossible to say it's going to happen in 3 to 5 years. So I think we just need to be sensible about that question. PPI and the E, don't forget the E on the end, is really important. I mean, it's not an afterthought, it's actually now a key criterion. Your proposal won't go down on the PPI, but the panels will make a big deal of the PPI. And unfortunately, Kelly's not here today, but she would have spoken about how PPI can make a massive difference to not only the research itself, but what can happen afterwards, the dissemination and the impact, which is the big thing at the moment. Of course, the quality of the methodology and the research you're doing is key, and the team behind that is, the research is only as good as the team. And it's particularly important for program grants because they are complicated, multidisciplinary, so the team makes it's a huge factor in the way the panel think. So you really need to have all the skills mix there, and Elaine, again, will touch upon this. There needs to be meaningful input to that skills mix. So time and again we see 1% FTE, and I know there's a bit of gaming because you can't always put 3, 4, 5 million pound programs with 20% FTE with the relevant players, but the co-applicants should be consultants. It's the cost of 1,000 underneath that should be doing the work. So think sensibly about how you cost these things. And then value for money, which is essentially. So as I said, it's a two-stage process. So we will look at stage 1 proposals. Don't rush your application, obviously. And I'll go through this process in more detail. So stage 1, I think you need to think about actually working up your whole proposal and then seeing it down. You shouldn't think I'll just do a rough and ready sketch and hope to make the difference in the weeks in between. You just won't be able to do it. So you need to have thought about the whole thing. And it was interesting, we were in Leicester last week and we had a program grant holder, Professor Denise Kendrick, and she said it took her 2 years to get from start to finish for a program grant. So if you're hoping to do it in a couple of weeks, I mean, you really are going to struggle. And bear in mind your audience. So the stage 1 panel is drawn from the stage 2 panels, those are the ones that look at the full applications. And these guys have got collectively hundreds of years of experience. So a typical stage 1 panel will be people who've got health services research expertise. So it will comprise the chairs of the stage 2 panels, Elaine, the director, myself. And they're looking for these sort of questions. Is it going to make a difference? So what? What are the methods like? What's the PPI like? Within reason, obviously, because it's a pre-seed version of what you're hoping to achieve. But if you start from a point of detail and then draw it back to a point of summary, I think you've got more chance of success. And then the shortlisted proposals go for methodological review. So they get, and the reason why we did this is under Paul Little, he used to be the previous director. It's not to give you a hard time, it's to help, because we recognise these are really difficult things to get. So the more support we can give you, the better. That's the way we looked at it. So they will be sent to all the different disciplines that look at this stage 2 application when it eventually comes in. And we tried to make sure that the people who look at it at stage 1 look at it at stage 2 again, so there's consistency, and they can see whether their points have been addressed or not. So once a stage 2 application comes in, it of course goes to peer review. We're looking at that process, and Elaine will touch upon that, so I'm not going to steal Elaine's thunder. But eventually, once the application comes in, together with the peer review comments, and you'll have the opportunity to rebut the peer review comments, the panels will look at all of that information and make a decision about whether to fund. And our panels are geared right now for a typical application, which is the development and evaluation of complex intervention, which is why we have health economists, statisticians, qualitative social scientists, and they will systematically go through every part of the proposal, if relevant. So these guys are really clever. They they've collectively, literally got hundreds of years' experience between them. So don't pull the wool over their eyes. If you think you can write in health economics paragraph, don't, because they will spot it a mile off. Again, Elaine will elaborate on that further. But if you're lucky enough to get a funding recommendation, you've still got some more pain to go through, because I have to go to the Department of Health to get approval, and they can change their mind. So even though they typically respect what the panels have done, that's why we're hired to do this, because they don't have the expertise, obviously. But if they really feel it doesn't map into a policy area or it's superseded by policy, they can turn around and say, no, sorry. Even though your experts have said they want to fund this, they can turn around and say no. So, and we're quite transparent about that. So it's disappointing. You've met the quality bar, but the department may say no, sorry. And there is an example. Somebody came in with a fluoride application, so they were looking to evaluate how fluoride can obviously make a difference, but the policy people said, actually, it's such a powerful thing, we're just going to do it anyway. Job done. Sadly for the researchers, it's unfortunate. So just a brief nod to development grants. So these were conceptualized in 2008 under the then program director, Adrian Grant. What he noticed was that there were some really, really promising applications, but they were just missing a couple of elements. And he thought, right, what we could do here is maybe give £100,000 so they could just plug those gaps. So the key thing is that there was a fully worked up program, and it was on how can we plug those gaps. And so it was a great idea, and it was working as a scheme very well, but unfortunately, for reasons we don't know, which is why we're going to look at this, the scheme doesn't seem to be doing what it's supposed to be doing. So it's very hard to not only get a development grant, but also, once you've got your grant, it's seemingly becoming very difficult to even then get a full proposal funded, because I don't have the absolute statistics to my mind now, but when the scheme launched, I think you had a 90% chance of getting a development grant, and then anybody who got a grant had a 70% success rate of getting a full proposal through and getting some funding. But now it's, I mean, literally the figures have fallen off a cliff. So we need to think about what's happening with that scheme. And it could be the scheme is fine, but it's just the way we're thinking about it and the way the panels are operating compared to 11 years ago. Or we, and I think this is what we're going to do, we may change it actually to make it more what it should be, which is a development grant, as opposed to something that's really worked up and then just needs a few gaps plugged. So right now it's staying as it is, but I think we'll be looking at this. So that's me done, and I'll hand over to Elaine.
Right. Thank you, Raj, and well done for staying alive despite your southern virus that you've now brought to spread through the northeast. So, if you're all poorly, you know who to blame. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's always great to come and visit this part of the world and this amazing building. We practiced on the Midlands lot last week. We were at Leicester City Football Ground, so it's a bit of a different venue here. So it was a bit distracting watching how much time they spend combing and grooming and doing things to the football pitch. But there you go. So my name's Elaine Hay. I took over as director of the programme about 6 months ago now. And you will have gathered that we're really, really passionate about this particular scheme. That's why we're here. We think it's the best, obviously, of all the NIHR schemes, and so we're here to convince you of that. But we do acknowledge that it is really, really, really difficult to write a programme grant. It's also really, really, really difficult to review these programme grants. So the more we can work together, just to pick up on something that Raj said, we are here to help. Our aim is to get the best quality programmes. And so we're not sort of some sort of panel that will just bat things away, hopefully. If we think that your grant has got a chance of success when you submit it, or even before you submit it, if you come and talk to us, we will try and help you through that process. So, many of the things that make a good programme grant are the same things that make any good application. But the most important thing is to have a really good story, and you have to grab the attention of the panel pretty quickly. And that's usually done either in your lay summary or in your scientific abstract. I think these slides are going to be available, aren't they? So don't worry, you don't need to scribble and take photos. And don't take anything for granted. It's often, if you're immersed in a particular subject, it will seem blindingly obvious to you why this is the next important question. But it won't, or it might not be obvious to the panel. So you have to tell us, you have to spell out why this is a really, really important question, why it's going to make a difference to patients, and how you're going to tackle that issue. I can't sort of emphasize that strongly enough. And, you may have the most beautifully worked out program from a methodological point of view, but it's often actually the patients on the panel or the non-specialists that'll say, well, I see that, but actually, does this need researching? Should we not just get on and do this? Does this need us to spend £2.5 million over 7 years? And you have to be a bit of you have to be able to predict what's going to be happening 7 years down the line. And we're getting quite a lot of programs now around developing apps and things like that I don't really understand, but my children probably do. But, the landscape is likely to have changed so much in 7 years' time, and the commercial sector are so far advanced of some of the things that we're doing in our own universities that you just have to keep these questions in your mind. It needs to be ambitious. I need to read it and think, oh gosh, this sounds really, really exciting, but not, crikey, how on earth do they expect to do all this in 5 years? So it's getting the balance right. It needs to be ambitious, but not over-ambitious. It's a shame our patient representative can't be here today, because they make a huge contribution to reviewing the grants, and your patients need to make a huge contribution to writing them. I like to see programs where it doesn't just say, these are folks we've involved, but it says, we asked the patients this and they said, well, no, that's a silly idea, do it this way instead, or you'll never engage people. That's not the really important question. So we want to see that you've listened to your patients. And Raj says that patients won't sink grants, but actually recently that has happened, hasn't it? There was a stage 1 application, I think it was I can't remember, it was either a stage 1 or a stage 2, where the patients were really, really vocal and said, we think that this isn't what patients would want. We don't think this should be funded. And they turned round the decision of the funding panel. As Raj has said, the methodologists on our panels are frighteningly clever, and they will pick up on all sorts of things that I wouldn't pick up on. So you need to make sure that the methodologists you involve are equally as clever. Because they are, sometimes it amazes me that anything gets funded, quite honestly, because the methodologists are just so pernickety sometimes about what they will and won't let through. But again, they're there to help. And there's no doubt that, when you get the reviewers' comments back sometimes, your heart will sink and you'll think, oh no, look at all these comments. But if you do take a deep breath, put them away for a day, don't think about them immediately, and come back and work through them in a systematic way, you will end up with a better proposal. Acronyms are our bugbear, and people will make up acronyms in a way to try and get more words into your proposal. But don't do that, because if we've got to keep looking back to remind ourselves what your favourite acronyms are, it just drives us crazy, and we will get bored and we'll stop doing it. Responding to the feedback thoroughly is important. Try not to annoy the panel when you respond to the feedback, even if you think they're wrong, which they might be, and the reviewers might be wrong. It's nice to sort of butter them up a little bit, because they will have done their best, and often if they've misinterpreted something and not got what you're wanting to do, that's actually your fault. It's that you've not explained it well enough. Because generally they will do their best, and they will do their best to try and improve your application. But if you come back in a very sort of arrogant, high-handed way, it won't sort of win you any points, to put it politely. It's really hard to cost programs effectively, and when there was a limit, when there was a limit of £2 million on the programmes, all the programmes came in at 1.999 million, and now people have sort of got this feel that it's probably about 2.5 million, so they come in at 2.4 or 0.999. So don't feel you have to spend all the money. Don't feel you have to have a programme that lasts 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. We would actually quite like to see a number of smaller programmes, perhaps pushing things, as Raj said, more towards the implementation, adoption end of the spectrum. If you've got a proposal that of an intervention or something that is reasonably well worked up, actually seeing how you can embed that to make it work in everyday care is something we would like to see. We'd also like to see things that weren't trials, but I'll come on to that later. And, we've said it, we'll say it again, and we'll continue saying it. These things take a long time to develop. Certainly for stage 1, up to you submitting your stage 1, I think you need to give yourself at least a year. Now, there's then often quite a short space of time between you hearing whether you've been shortlisted for stage 2 and the next opportunity to submit your stage 2 application. Now, you don't have to submit it then. You can delay it, but what you can't do is say you'll submit it and then change your mind. So you need to think that through. But there's often about 6 weeks, I think, between that you have time to to finish your stage 2 applications, which goes back to what Raj said, that you actually need to have your stage 2 written really, when you submit your stage 1. And that 6 weeks is used to respond to the feedback you get from your stage 1 application. Okay, so having taken over from Paul and built on the success of the programme grant scheme that Adrian and then Paul have achieved, we want to carry on, obviously, with that, but it's also an opportunity to just think about what we're doing, and we want to make a sort of next step up, if you like, in the success of the programme grant scheme. And what I would like to see, and I think the team at Twickenham agree, is it does feel as if we've got ourselves into a little bit of a rut. It does feel as if the message out there is the only thing that programme grants do is to develop and test complex interventions. Now, that's likely to remain our bread and butter. I think that's fair to say. But I would really, really want to see different types of research and different types of programs, and programs using more novel methods in the future. So we're here out talking to you to try and give that message, and we'd like feedback from you about the sorts of programs you think we should be feeding, because we're actually, we're here to serve you, if you like. If we're not funding the type of research that you want to do and you think we should be doing, then we need to know that. There are certain areas that the NIHR and the department are asking us to prioritise, or at least to encourage applications from. They want research carried out in geographical areas where there is high health need and where we can make a difference. And I come from Stoke-on-Trent, so that's an obvious place where we should be doing this type of stuff. The North East similarly. You've got lots of health inequalities, you've got lots of health issues. So your sort of geographical area is exactly the sort of place where we want the research to happen. There's still a lot of research focused in London. And we need to address that. And I feel that coming from a non-Russell Group university myself at Keele, and coming from an area of high social deprivation, that's something that I feel really passionate about. If we want to increase the diversity of the research we do, we also need to think a bit differently about what patient benefits means. And we've had some interesting conversations with our panel members and with our patient groups about this, because again, it feels sometimes as if the patient benefit in the programs we're funding just hinges on the result of that final trial, if there is a trial at the end. We even talk about patient benefit, so I've at least added an S and called it patient benefits now as the first stage in this, because there are benefits that come throughout the whole programme. I want the qualitative research to show me how that benefits patients in its own right. How does the development work? How does the training of healthcare professionals and so on and so forth lead directly to patient benefits? And using different methodologies, how can that benefit patients? How can modelling of research findings without having to do a big trial in the end, how can that benefit patients? It can, it has to. I can't believe that the only research methodology that benefits patients is a trial. Now, I'm a trialist. I've made my reputation and my career has been based on doing trials. So again, I'm not anti-trials, but I can't believe that that's the only methodology that will benefit patients. But it's up to you to make that case. Right, I think I've probably said all that already. So the other thing I think that has struck me as I've got to know a little bit more about the NIHR is what a complicated organisation it is. And I think that's probably the understatement of the century. And I sort of feel, I always had this sort of naive view that there was a system whereby, maybe, to give an example, maybe the idea for a research project came from working with individuals in a clerk. Maybe that was then picked up by the Research for Patient Benefits scheme and tested locally. And then maybe if that was successful, it would be brought to the programme grant scheme for further development and dissemination and working through. And then when we'd all done that, maybe it dropped into the AHSNs and got complicated. Does that happen? No. So again, I think if you can start to help us get that journey worked out, that would be great. And if you can show that you've linked with other bits of the funding landscape and with charities and with your local NHS, that's what we would like to see. The latest themed call, or one of the latest themed calls from the NIHR is for chronic pain. You hopefully will have noticed that. And I'm pleased to say that we've been successful in working with Versus Arthritis, and they've agreed to co-fund some programs in that space. We've also talked to Diabetes UK. We've got some talks with some other charities coming up. It's quite a tricky thing to negotiate. It's something the NIHR are keen on. From my perspective, I think from the charities, it helps them get their message across. They get more bang for their bucks. And I think they can really, really, really help at the implementation end of things and making a difference to patients. Another thing I'm passionate about a lot of things, especially particularly on Valentine's Day, of course. Why are we here on Valentine's Day? The other thing is that we're keen to use the programme grant scheme as a way of developing capacity amongst teams and researchers. And that's quite tricky because, you know, sometimes we often get proposals where the 17 applicants are a football team or more than a football team of professors. I would like to see some more junior people as being co-applicants, and we've got to, haven't we? Otherwise, how are they ever going to then take over as lead applicants in their own right? And maybe we don't need £2.5 million 5-year programmes, particularly if we are using different methodologies. You know, it may well be that we can have 3-year programmes that use observational data to show patient benefit, or IPD meta-analyses, or other fancy things. So keep that in mind. Peer review, again, is very difficult to get right, and it is really, really time-consuming for people doing the peer reviews. It's a nightmare for the Secretariat to get people to agree to do peer reviews. And from the applicant stage, for programme grants at the moment, I think it does feel a bit like overkill, because what we do, I mean, at the moment what we do is at stage 1, the applications all go out for external peer review, which includes another gaggle of methodologists. Those reviews then come back to the panel and are reviewed by our own methodologists, who are, as we've said, very, very clever people. They sometimes disagree with the external reviews. The applicants have the opportunity to respond to that first round of external peer reviews, but not to the panel reviews, and so it can feel a bit uncomfortable from the applicant's perspective as well, that, you know, we thought we'd done well, we thought we'd had good external peer reviews, but now we've got another lot, and our programme has been bounced on that basis. It also means there's a lot of post-award work to be done by the panel, or at least, you know, before contracting can happen. There's another lot of reviewers' comments or panel reviewers' comments that the applicants have to respond to. So it feels a bit cumbersome. So what we're going to trial is that at the time the external reviews get sent out for stage 2, that's going to be restricted to clinicians and general health services researchers, but we're also going to send the applications to our own panel methodologists at that time. So the applicants will just get one lot of reviews to respond to. So that will hopefully happen in the near future. We'll see how it works. And again, we would like to hear your feedback on the process and to help us get that right. There are other things that drive us potty sometimes. In terms of the process of the programme grants. We have a lot of variations to contract, and a lot of those are for reasons outside the applicant's control. You know, GDPR caused a lot of delays, excess treatment costs. Every time we seem to try and make that easier, it seems to try and make it worse, so that's a problem. The HRA, with those changes, that caused a lot of delays. So there are lots of these things that cause delays in the programme, let alone delays in the programme itself in terms of recruitment and so on. We want to find out a little bit more about what those variation to contracts are for. You know, some programmes are having 5-10 variations to contracts. It's a nightmare for the team and for the panel chairs who review them. I think the other thing that people often don't factor in is the time it takes to write the dreaded final report, which is a monster for programme grants, because programme grants are so complicated. Raj and I have got a meeting next week with the journals library people because I just feel it's over the top. You know, I think that what we would like to try and get towards is a much shorter report and a list of publications rather than repeating, having to write everything twice. So I feel your pain. I've been through it myself, and we're trying to help. We would like more applications, and we would like a different, more diverse range of applications, and that's why we're here. And we would like to be able to really demonstrate what the impact of the programme grant scheme is. And it's a good time for us to try and get a handle on that at the moment, because everyone's preoccupied with thinking about their impact case studies for REP. So, when as I say, I'm new in this role, what would I like to be saying to you if I come back in a few years' time? I would like to see that we've got more applications. I would like to see that we've been able to make the argument with the NIHR and DH to have more budget, to have more money to spend. I'd like to see a more diverse range that tackles the social care agenda, the public health agenda, as well as the clinical agenda. It does feel really daunting to write these applications, so I'd like us to have a better dialogue about what we can and can't do to help you with that. And, I think I'm probably speaking on behalf of the whole team that we'd like to see more programmes finishing on time and on target, because it does cause us problems with budgeting, with our budget, when things get moved from one financial year to another. So I think I will end by saying what I said at the beginning. It is a fantastic scheme, and what I don't want you to go away with is the message that Elaine doesn't want any more development of complex interventions. That's not what we want to do. That is not what I'm saying. I think that will always remain the cornerstone of what we do, but we want to see other things as well, and it's up to you to send us those. We think that we probably need to be proactive in that space, and that just saying we want different applications isn't likely to change very much. We're also really, really aware that we have to change the way our panels behave, so I know that. So for October this year, we're going to have a sort of commission call, a special call, if you like, where we're specifically going to invite applications, and we're not quite sure what to call it, but different types of applications, more diverse applications, applications that are using other methods other than trials. So if you can come up with a phrase of words that, because it seems a bit funny about a call saying what we don't want rather than what we do want. And we will continue to look at what we do, and we want to listen to you. We also want more panel members and new panel members, and we particularly want panel members from areas like this where the number of applications we get is reasonably low. So there's an advert out at the moment for panel members, so please do look on the website and encourage if you're not wanting to apply, encourage your friends to apply. And again, if there are people who are involved in research, in health services research, that isn't only about developing trials, then we would particularly like to see applications for those people. And what's the rule about people who've been a panel member before? Do they have to have been not a panel member for 2 years before they can reapply? Yeah, we will be relaxed. So any of you who've been panel members in the past who feel inspired to come back, we'd love to have you. And that's it. Thank you. Right. I think it's over to Chris now, who's going to tell you what it's really like.
Thank you very much. I better explain who I am, first of all, I think, to people in the room. So I'm an NHS consultant in stroke medicine, also a half-time researcher at Newcastle University, actually funded on a fellowship by the Stroke Association. And I've been asked to talk about tips for success with programmes course, the usual disclaimer that none of this comes with any guarantee. And there may be probably some repetition, maybe a little bit of disagreement with what we just heard, but what I'm talking about is historical, really. I think the reason I'm probably standing here is I've been a sort of co-applicant and then a sort of co-lead for 2 different programs. I've also been involved in another 3 in various capacities and currently involved in building another 3 applications. So I thought to describe maybe the ideal situation from maybe my perspective of what a program should look like. And I think it should be a chunky area of work, really. It's got to have something to get your teeth stuck into from various angles. So from a service clinical perspective, it should be something which has got a need, an unmet need. I think national priorities are very important. Even if there's not a clear need, then heterogeneity, which is resulting in probably different experiences for patients and providers and different outcomes, is probably just as important. And there should be issues there which are discrete, but they overlap. You can tease them apart, tackle them in different ways, but there is something about the story as a whole that makes it an important topic and one that should be a priority. It should be a stable issue, I think, not one that's going to rapidly change in the short term. And create a large health burden, and should be quite topical and ideally generalizable. So there should be something not just specifically about your region or your service, it should be something that can be taken and applied elsewhere. And I think that's part of the message of it making a difference in the sort of the 3 to 5 years, is that should become as a sort of mandated, really. Complex intervention, yes, everything I've done so far programs has involved a complex intervention, seemingly more and more complex, and I think that's partly because you need that for the high impact. I think my perspective as with a clinical hat on is that I think programs are fantastic because they really do get engagement with services, and they do the type of research and get the type of engagement that makes a difference to what happens in services and patients. Consequently, that means you've got to aim high to have a high impact, and that makes things complicated. But as well as having your own sort of interest in this particular area that you're basing your program on, I think it's quite a good tactic to have something about that's generalizable. So one of the examples that I'll tell you about in a minute, one of the attractions for it being funded, I think, was that in working with the ambulance services and stroke, there was a particular interest in what that could mean for other conditions that the ambulance service had to deal with, other issues around how the paramedics worked and the ambulances worked. And we were asked, for instance, to consider whether our intervention that was being run through the ambulance service was causing decompensation in the ambulance service in other ways, in a more generic way. And I think that makes it more attractive for the funder because they can see other advantages out of your program. I've talked about already really this, so you need a strong multidisciplinary team who have the right type of interest, and I would say that you need a high senior position in a clinical service to be involved, not just to make it happen, but as a co-applicant, and because you need their support to sometimes to get the freedom to operate within the services and to get the information and engagement that you need. PPI, obviously very crucial, is needed at numerous levels, and in the programs I've been involved with, we have PPI in our steering committee, we have it on the different groups that run the different themes in the programs, and then we even have further PPI in some of the local services where some of the research is operating, and they've all added value in different ways at those different levels. And of course, strong academic support, and actually, particularly in the area of health economics, actually, we've involved an element of some new methodological development, and I realise that's not sort of what programs are mainly about, but I think that was a bit of a sweetener in terms of we're going into new areas of health services type research, and we're going to possibly be combining data that hadn't been done before, and it was interesting then to explore some new angles in how that data is being used to answer the question, although I think you have to be careful with that in terms of how you phrase it in your applications. So it's thinking about positive experiences and challenges rather than pros and cons. I think that programs for me are interesting and relevant. The danger is they can become all things to all people, and it's very important in the development of your program idea that you really do bolt down what it is you're trying to achieve. And those discussions can take quite a long time, particularly if you've got a team of people with different views about what the priorities should be that the program is trying to achieve. The flexibility of the program is fantastic, that you can sort of react to early work in the program, to changes going on in health policy and in services that allow you to adapt your program to make it more and more relevant. Somebody may even steal your thunder and do some of the work that you were planning to do in your program before you get to do it, and you have to react to that. And there's various ways of working with the competition and sort of collaborating with them to then strengthen your program and work together. They're very interested if you've got some funding and resource and time to then take their work on the next stage. And I find that the program funders have been very supportive of that. The danger is you have too much flexibility, and again, people can drift off into all sorts of interesting cul-de-sacs that are less relevant to the overall ambition of the program. So it has to be managed quite actively, and people stay on the general direction you're going, but there are some very interesting scenic routes that you can go as well along the way. Services get very excited about program grants, I find, as well, very keen to help because they can see the difference it may make to them immediately. However, you are engaging with a group of people who may be quite research naive, and that can take a lot of support, and also can be quite demanding, actually. Want the results now, want to know what this means. They've worked with you for 3 years collecting data. When are the results going to be ready? What are you going to do about it? So, it's just to prepare you for that. You can be overtaken by events because you have to, as I've already mentioned, things happen elsewhere in the NHS and in new services, and you have to be ready to adapt. But that adaptation actually is a strength as well. It makes you more relevant. I think as a funder, it's relatively light reporting. I mean, sort of I would say that although there's a long report at the end during the program, it's actually quite light touch, I think, in terms of what you're having to report back, and that reflects, I think, the flexibility and the ownership locally that you have of the program. But it does mean you do take a lot of responsibility. So whereas a HTA sort of awards you know very clearly what you're going to do, the technology you're going to test, how you're going to do it, and that's what you've got to deliver. What you're going to be careful with a program is that they are for 5 years of active management. You cannot let them drift. You have to keep on top of them, and you have to make sure that you're heading towards that direction that you said you would do with the overall aim. They are well funded, I think, and there is some complexity to that funding, of course, with the involvement of healthcare delivery more in the program than maybe in some other funding streams. So the treatment costs can be complicated, particularly if you're trying to work out, exactly if you're going to do development work and then you're going to do that as to develop a trial intervention and you don't quite know what that is yet. To work out what the NHS costs of that are is going to be very difficult in advance. So that's a challenge. And I don't know the answer to that, particularly as this is a changing landscape at the moment. But just to flag it up. It's great for forming new collaborations. For instance, you go where the expertise is. One of our programs, we collaborate with Swansea University to do all the statistics work because they've got a lot of expertise in pre-hospital ambulance data analysis. So we work with them. That's a very good collaboration. And in terms of collaborations with services, again, some very interesting collaborations, but you can find enthusiasm wanes if people don't feel they're engaged in delivering. So you sort of do quite a lot of nurturing and relationship management within a program, I think, that takes some time. You do get a chance to use novel data sources, particularly from routine healthcare data collection. It can be a bit of a struggle to get those sometimes, but that is actually, if anything, I think getting better. And that makes things quite exciting for what you can now get hold of without the time and also the cost required to collect it. If the data is already there, why collect it from scratch? Numerous outputs can happen from a program. too many almost. To be writing papers all the time. You can get to a difficult situation there where you've got a lot of people involved. Deciding on authorship can be difficult, but I wouldn't say that was a downside of things. These are great things to do, and sometimes it's just difficult to know when to stop, really, and have you delivered what you said you were going to do. But you've got to have impact. You've got to make sure you do at the end of the day, you pay this back to the services and tell them what it is that you found and disseminate for impact. So I'll just give a couple of quick examples. So this, the first program I was involved in as a co-applicant was determining assessing services for hyperacute stroke DASH. I think this was funded in the very first round, actually, back in the Topic Network days. So this was led by Gary Ford, and we had 4 objectives. This was ambitious as a program. This was a lot of work, and actually it was very successful. We evaluated the FAST campaign for public awareness as response to stroke symptoms, showed that it appeared to have an effect, but actually it was quite short term. That was done with obviously a lot of engagement work, a lot of collection of information from people, members of the public and services. We looked at various data around response to symptoms when people had them that we collected from routine sources. Then there was a decision aid for patient collision thrombolysis assessment for stroke. Thrombolysis is one of the emergency treatments we give for stroke, and there's no formal way to help make a decision. It's quite a complex decision with quite some risks and benefits attached to it, and you have to make a very rapid decision. So this developed actually a piece of software at the end of the day which allowed that decision to be made and portrayed pictorially to patients and clinicians in the A&E department to say, if you have what's your chance of disability and death if you do take the decision to have treatment, and what it is if you don't. And that developed a piece of software which has sort of been then explored commercially, actually, for its use. The bit I was in charge of for this program was modelling regional emergency stroke services, the best outcomes in the region, and this actually was a very large audit, really, in a way of collecting data of what was going on with stroke patients in the region, their ambulance transportation, what care they got in different places. Actually, that went on to change stroke services in the region. We were engaged with the Stroke Improvement Network, who existed at that time as part of the cardiovascular network. It did change where patients went to. It provided ammunition for commissioners to make difficult decisions, and has probably not made me welcome in Hartlepool. So the fourth one was development of a pilot study for a paramedic-led pharmaceutical trial. And it'd be interesting to think whether this would be now included in the program, because its argument at the time was that we needed to show that actually, as a profession, paramedics were able to do this. That was sort of the service argument for it. But it was effectively a pilot study of a drug for lowering blood pressure in acute stroke. What it did achieve was extremely good engagement with the ambulance service, who were very interested in this, got quite a lot of media attention as well. And in combination, you can see these are all sort of overlap. It's all about emergency response to stroke and what to do. After we did DASH, we've done PAIRS, which is come to the end now, which I co-lead with Gary Ford. This has only now got 2 themes, you see, we learned. But they're quite chunky in themselves. The first one was development and delivery of a pragmatic trial to enhance the paramedic role to reduce delays in emergency treatment of stroke patients. Again, we took that engagement in the ambulance service, we built on it, and we enhanced the role of the paramedics. This has also got a process evaluation in the trial. It's a very large trial. We've finished recruiting last year 1,300 patients, not just in the northeast, but the northwest and Wales. We're analysing the data. It's currently in Swansea at the moment. And we'll see whether this new role of the paramedics that we developed, that they were very keen to do, we have to find out whether that's led to patients getting better treatment in hospital as a result of what the paramedics are doing. And this is the one where actually we've also collected data along the way about if paramedics are spending longer with stroke patients, is that not putting pressure on the service elsewhere and decompensating it? So we have these generic questions about service demand capacity and also professional boundaries and what it's appropriate for paramedics to be doing in their typical day. The second element of PAIRS was modelling thrombectomy treatment. This has now come along in recent years as a sort of dyno-rod treatment for stroke, where you pull out the clot rather than try and dissolve it with thrombolysis. It can only be done in 24 hospitals in the UK. There's 120 that admit stroke, so you see there's a lot of patients being moved all over the place. And so we've got to understand what are the barriers to implementation of this. I've just said one of them. But there's all sorts of models about how you get the patients to the right place very quickly. And actually, there's a lot of office-based work, really. This is using data sources that we had to develop the best configuration of where people should go initially for their first assessment and be transferred on for thrombectomy, and simply basics like calculating how many people per year in the UK should get this treatment. That wasn't known. So basic questions like that we've answered. And this has been a collaboration, actually, a wide collaboration. At times it's felt like that film Ocean's 11. You know, it's just like lots of people involved. We've had various clerks involved. We've had international collaborators collecting up all of the data about the most effective use of this treatment and what the criteria are. So that's been very exciting. And you can see again overlap between the two, because we've got that ambulance service. What can the paramedics do? Then what's this new treatment? How do we tie these two together? So there's a couple of examples for you. So final tips from me. You're going to have a minimum of 6 months preparation and at least another 12 months of an application cycle. In fact, for the PAIRS program, it was 2 years from our application to contract. By the time we responded to reviewers and got down. And actually, there was an interesting comment from one reviewer that by the time we got contracted, that probably the problem would have solved itself. In fact, that's proven not to be the case, and here we are 7 years later, and it really still isn't any better, and that's why our research is still relevant. So fortunately, we were funded. It takes a lot of time to develop. I'd recommend some administration support during that time. Get high-level service engagement so that can all happen. Get them as a co-applicant, sort out who your PPI is going to be. They'll be very enthusiastic, they'll want to help. Define a management structure. Obviously, I don't think you need to define that clear. It's too much in the application, but you need to have your overall structure of who's doing what and how you're running it on a week-to-week basis to keep that control of it, and that it is not going off at the tangent, or if it is going off the tangent, it's a relevant one. Think about how patients will benefit from this and from what you're developing. And I think just, it's a very basic thing. Have your very clear objectives for year 1 and 2. That may well simply just include things like systematic review, stakeholder engagement, development of intervention. Don't expect £2 million if you're then saying, well, after that, we'll decide what we're going to do next. You've got to then sort of outline where you're likely to be ending up in years 3, 4, and 5, or however long you're going on for. But bear in mind, there is flexibility, and I think for this sort of interface between service and academia, that is fantastic. Health economics has been very important for us, as process evaluation, degree of implementation, research, and ultimately just have a think, we should be presenting this argument, realistically, how is it going to change things? Because although it's has been our experience as well that some things have changed, but other things it's really hard to have impact because events overtake you or the world doesn't want to listen. But you still have to go into it with an attitude that you're going to do something which is trying to make a difference. Okay, I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj, Elaine, and Chris for those talks. It's an opportunity now for you to ask questions of us. We've done lots of talking, so I'll invite all the speakers and program managers, others to come up from program grants. So I think we're going to have a roving mic, care of Anuswa. We've got some panel members as well to join us, which is brilliant.
Just a couple of things to pick up on that Chris said. Mentioned about methodological advances, methodological research. We really, really are keen to see that housed within the programmes. I think the NIHR as a whole is keen to see how it can support research in methodological advances in applied health research. And to our mind, the programme grants are the obvious places to house that. So don't feel shy about putting that in. I think it would be seen as a positive thing. Okay. Questions? Oh, actually, Alan. All right.
Just basically convey their perspective as panel members about what it's like to look at these applications and review them, and just general thoughts, really.
My name is Fliss Murta, and I'm Professor of Palliative Care at University of Hull. I'm just coming to the end of my own programme grant, and I've been a panel member for 3 years, I think. I would say they're very interesting to review, and they're quite, they range over quite a lot of different areas, so it is quite challenging sometimes. My own perspective is that I think we quite often have a lot of discussion about whether it's really going to change things. And I think if you can't get that big question right first, then I wouldn't set off on the 2-year journey. Just really think, is this an important area? And is this work going to really change things? And I think if you can say yes to those 2 questions right at the beginning, then you're onto something. And it's about refining it to get it good enough. But if you can't say yes, hand on heart. And it is difficult because we all love our own areas, and we all think our own areas are fantastically important. I think palliative care is so important, and nobody's ever thought about it enough. But you actually have to let go of that. Go and talk to somebody who's not in your area and say, is this really an important question?
I'll give you 4 top tips here. The first is start with something that gets somebody who's reading your application by the throat. Most of us are we're halfway through February only, and I've already reviewed 6 fellowship applications, 2 programme grant applications, and 10 papers for journals. And if I pick something up that's got 8 acronyms in the first 2 paragraphs, you're already 1 down. So here's a really eye-catching starter. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the diabetes physicians in Leeds, where I work, said to me, 20% of the people with type 1 diabetes in my clinic are now obese. And that causes real problems because they've got both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and we don't know quite how to manage that. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm sitting back thinking, wow, I always think of people with type 1 diabetes as skinny adolescents. What's going on here? I'll give you another example. A physiotherapist presented an application. She said, we're doing these fantastic knee replacements now, partial knee replacements, full knee replacements. The technology is brilliant. They don't have always the desired benefit because people you stick them into get frightened of using them. And the 2 things they're most frightened of is walking up and down stairs and kneeling on them. And we were talking, I thought, oh gosh, I can imagine that, because if I had one of these things and you knelt on it, I'd worried about dislodging it. We all went out for coffee in this panel, came back in, and the person sat next to me was kneeling on the ground, and he'd had a partial knee replacement. and he realised this was absolutely... So those sorts of every project ought to start with a sentence like that. This is, I'm a psychiatrist. 1/4 of all suicides in England and Wales have been seen in an acute hospital in the 12 months beforehand after a non-fatal act of self-harm. If you go to acute hospital in England and Wales after a non-fatal episode of self-harm, you've got a 50% chance of not even having a 20-minute interview with somebody asking you why, and of being discharged with no follow-up plans. So, you've given me one. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think there are always 2 questions buried in programmes, actually. One is about the condition. That's what I've just given you some examples of. What you're going to do, is it a complex intervention? How are you going to evaluate it? But the other is about the service within which that condition is being managed. And the question there is, this is all very clever and it's nice intervention things, but is it going to run in the real world? And the 2 real world questions that I always bubble up in my mind is, one is anything that's on a smartphone. I'm so bored with reading things about stuff on smartphone. 50% of people with a smartphone, it's only got one app on it, and 50% of apps are only looked at once. Generally, people use apps to go shopping and order taxis and get fast food. They don't do it to tell them they're too fat and they're not walking. Well, there's a bit of these things. I don't know how long these things on people's wrists last, but so it's really, it's all right to say they're there, and there's a trial with 50 people that showed they used it, but most people most of the time. And the other is almost anything that requires a new team or a new thing rather than the people there already replacing what they're doing with a new thing. Because the NHS is strapped for cash, onslaught from a succession of neoliberal governments, and can't afford new things, and they don't fit in anywhere. So that's the second thing, two big themes. The third, I've got loads of things I could say, but I'll stick with 4. The third is always go for a crystal mark when you write. I, like most people, read these things tired and in the evenings or on trains. And I think if people can't write clearly, they can't think clearly, and if they can't think clearly, they're not going to deliver the programme. So you could almost do one of the common mistakes we find is that people cut and paste their scientific abstract into the plain English summary, which is stupid because they'd actually get much further if they cut and pasted the plain English summary into the scientific, because then everybody on the panel would understand what they wanted to do. And the fourth thing is, I've worked over the years quite a lot for NIHR. I work for programs at the moment and fellowships simultaneously. I've worked for RFPB and HTA in the past, and the reason I do it is because NIHR is not a club. And that's quite unlike some of the other funders, some of the research councils I could mention. And I'm aggrieved because I'm not in any of those clubs. But it is genuinely true that when you get to NIHR, you don't get that, oh, that's a great place, Cambridge, it's wonderful, and Professor Brown does great work, so it doesn't matter if the application's not very good. You really, really, really don't get that. And as you've heard already, people want to talk to you about it, they want to give you their money. Ask. Go to RDS. I do an awful lot of people just coming to see me at work and saying, I know you're on this panel, can I talk to you? There's no conflict of interest, because if we apply, you'll be out of the room anyway. So just keep asking. It isn't just one of these one-off things. I could do more, but I'll stop there.
Hello, my name is Dr. Rashmi Dubey. I'm one of the microbiologists in the region. My question is how NIRH is going to support about antibiotic resistance, and what are the local opportunities we have? Thank you.
Me particularly.
Yeah, what are you going to do about antimicrobial resistance?
Well, I mean, I guess it's an area of importance. You've said that. We have funded programs in this field, haven't we, I think? Do you want to answer?
Yeah, so there was an antimicrobial resistance themed call recently, so NIHR absolutely signal their interest in this area. Because the theme call isn't being highlighted doesn't mean we're not interested and remain interested in the area. So again, it's whatever idea you've got, make sure it fits within the remit of the programs and the schemes that you want to apply to, and you're absolutely open to answer your question. I mean, that's the beauty of a lot of response mode schemes, that it's up to you to pitch the idea, and we're willing to listen to it. I mean, clearly other NIHR schemes operate a commission mode model. But to cut a long story short, we're very interested in antimicrobial resistance. Dame Sally's made it an absolute priority. She's made it very clear this is a huge area that needs to be addressed. So if you have a good idea, we're very happy to read it and think about it.
Excellent, thank you. I think I'm interested, and I would need your help in recording that. Thank you.
Thanks. I think this is probably a question for Raj. You were talking about the relationship between the program development grants and the full schemes and whether that was working and quite as you'd expected. I have a bit of personal experience here in the sense that we were awarded a PGG and then knocked back at stage 1 for work that felt as if it was more or less what we had set out to do in the PDG, and I found that a very bewildering experience, and I just wondered whether you had any comments.
So the scheme, as I said, was set up to try and plug those gaps where we thought a very good worked up programme was just falling short. But we also recognise now that the form isn't really geared up to describe that full programme very well. And it's hard, actually. The panels really struggle to think and conceptualise what the full programme is trying to do on the back of the development grant and what the exit point is and how that naturally fits into the future work. And often, when a stage 2 application comes in, it's completely different to what was pitched when the development grant came through. Which is why we're sending development grant people back to stage 1 now. And in a way, is it really a shortcut to getting a stage 2 application, which what it was really set out to do? And because it isn't anymore, we need to look at what's happening here. In terms of your question, I think the panels are struggling with what this means, because it was a scheme set up 11 years ago by the then programme director, who had a very clear vision of what he wanted out of that scheme. And I don't think that's translated through into the current panel thinking. I still think it's something that actually could add value, but we need to look at what we want out of this. I mean, Elaine may want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'd almost throw the question back, I think, because we'd like to hear from you what would be most helpful in terms of funding programme development grants that fills a space that isn't covered by RFPB or the other funding streams. And I know that when we're reviewing the programme development grants, they often sink now because people aren't convinced by the programme that they're developing, so when you're writing the application form for the programme development grant, you have to say what your programme's going to be, and it feels that the panels are generally sinking the programme development grants because there isn't enough detail in the programme, which to my mind is not particularly fair on the applicants, because the whole reason they're writing a programme development grant is because they need to develop the programme. So I think it would be really helpful, and you don't need to feedback now, but you can drop Raj or myself or Sean an email and just say, if you've got any ideas about what would be most helpful, maybe it doesn't need to be £100,000, maybe it needs to be 30,000 for some networking. I don't know, but we'd like some feedback from you guys as to what would be helpful in terms of that scheme, because we're struggling to know what best to do with it.
I was really interested, I'm sorry, I'm Neil Burnett from Manchester. I'm an oncologist. I was really interested to hear several of you mention modelling. And I wonder if I could ask you a little bit about that, because in the past, other funders have not taken any notice at all of applications that I've made to support research using modelling. But particularly, I wanted to check that we're talking about the same sorts of things. So in the past, I've done some deterministic mathematical modelling, basically looking at computer simulations of patients being treated, which I guess is not the same as modelling thrombectomy services. But could you comment on what the panel might find interesting in terms of modelling? Because it would help me to know whether I should actually try and put some of my interest into the grant application, or whether perhaps I shouldn't.
So where would you, I guess one question for you is, where would you currently get that sort of work funded?
I've failed to get it funded.
And I think that's been the driving force for me, because I'm aware that, you know, researchers from my own group and others who work in this sort of space and in applied epidemiology and in using routinely collected healthcare data to answer clinical questions and the sort of modelling that you're referring to can't get that work funded. And I think that it's a bit of a risky strategy for us to take, and we've talked about it at the panels, and we know that if we are going to fund that sort of research, and I want to, we're going to have to change the makeup of our panels as well. Because currently the panel's members they just don't understand it, really. They don't get it. So we need people that do get it on the panels, so people like you and your friends, you know, I would encourage you to apply to join the panels. But that's absolutely the sort of direction, additional direction and expansion of the scheme that we want to take it in. Alan, do you want to? Oh, Chris.
I'm smiling a wry smile a bit here because my son's in applied maths in Manchester and does exactly this sort of stuff. You haven't come across him yet, but he's been looking at stuff at the Christie, for example. He's been looking at some of their data. He works in applied maths. And I think part of the challenge is he's a mathematician and he was out of theoretical physics originally, and in truth, he's not terribly interested in the cancer, he's interested in the maths. Yep. So if you aren't careful, you're applying new maths to a new clinical problem, and EPSRC don't like it because it's too health related, and the health people don't like it because it's too mathematical. So you have to be really clear about, if it's coming NIHR-wards, that the mathematicians have got to sit on their hands a bit about being too novel in all that. But then I think you're right, if you're going to, you know, if we've got health economists and trialists on the team and this stuff's coming through, you've got to have somebody who's a mathematical modeler who understands it, but speaks health speak. Yeah. And that they're still fairly, and speaks routine data speak as well. And there's a group in Manchester developing exactly all this, but there aren't many places that can do that. So were you reaching for the...
Yeah, thank you. So just to confirm really, the type of modelling that I was describing there is care pathway modelling. So it's looking at sort of decision trees around movement of groups of patients in one way or the other along sort of complex care pathways really, and then scaling that up to what that would mean for the efficiency of care. And a lot of it actually overlaps with health economics. Because a lot of the time what we've been trying to do is to show what's the best service efficiency for how services are configured and where they're geographically located, and then what the implications is then for commissioners in language that commissioners would understand, which basically means not qualis, but finding other ways of doing it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Morgan. I'm Business Development Manager here at Newcastle University. My question, first of all, is to Chris, but then generally for the panel. Chris, you mentioned in your first programme grant, you have a company interested in one of the toolkits that you've developed. Can you tell me a bit about when you engaged with that company and how soon they came on board in the whole start of the scheme?
I can tell you a little bit about that. That was the creation of software to aid a clinical decision in an emergency situation. The theme lead for that group actually used the university computer department to create the initial software, and that was a version which sort of ran. It wasn't very flashy, and it sort of did the job, and it was enough for us to evaluate whether it was useful to clinicians and what patients thought of it. We didn't look at it to evaluate whether it changed care or not. And then and I'm not quite sure how this bit happened, but then there was engagement with an external company, and I think it was through the business development office that how that happened. And they have gone on to make it look better, and I think there's been a licensing agreement between them the university and that company, who I think actually recognise it may not be of great value in healthcare services where this is a very established treatment, but actually they're looking at using it in countries which are naive to thrombolysis and to assist clinicians and patients in the early use of the drug. But that's as much as I know where it's up to at the moment.
Is it working? I know the NIHR are really keen for some schemes to engage with industry or have some commercial involvement.
So I was just about to say, many years ago the lens wasn't really on IP and commercialisation and all things intellectual property, but now there's a real focus. So we need to know exactly what the arrangements are going to be, and that dialogue starts at the point of contracting. And the starting position of NIHR is that the IP vests with the trust, who we contract with, but we're flexible because we recognise the universities are often best placed to deal with this sort of stuff because they've got the tech transfer offices. But all of that is dealt with at contracting, and if there's a commercialisation route at the end of the grant, then we want to be involved because we need to know what's going on. This is not about policing it or trying to make money. It's about just making sure that the very things that the DH or NIHR have invested in is going to maximise patient benefit.
I've just thought of something else that I meant to say. For some of the sort of specific initiatives that we want to do looking forwards, I think we're aware that we will need to convene different panels, so we probably will, so for our October call around whatever it is, we're having a call about novel methodologies, let me say, we will convene a panel of people who we hope will understand that field. Social care is another area that we're being encouraged to try and increase applications from, and the RFPB have just run a call, haven't they, in social care, and they convened a special panel, and if we do that we would do the same, because we are aware that actually we've talked about difficulties in changing behaviour of clinicians, but actually changing the behaviour of the panels is quite hard as well.
Thank you. I think it's probably time to draw things to a close. We have run over a little bit, but I think that's been really helpful conversation. Thanks to all of our speakers, to all Programme Grants colleagues, and to Chris for coming, and to you for your engagement. Also a thanks to those who were involved in organising the event from RDS and from Programme Grants. Those of you that have got one-to-one sessions, they will happen in here, so if you come back in and meet colleagues at the time that you've been given. Otherwise, I'm sure we can continue conversations over lunch, which will be where we had coffee this morning. Thanks very much.